Hey there, everybody. Can't exactly believe that the Fast and Furious movie, the first one, has already turned 25 years, and this video is dedicated to the very exact same purpose, celebrating the 25 years. Hey there, everybody. How's it going? This is John, and you're watching CineMania 24/7, the channel dedicated to movies, music, physical media, books, video games, and pop culture. So, The Fast and the Furious has already turned 25 years. Who in their right mind would have believed that a movie about cars, bald dudes, and essentially a movie that is point break with automotive machines turning into a billion-dollar franchise? And today, its first movie is celebrating its 25th anniversary. That's crazy given the idea that this franchise has evolved so much in the last 2 decades. Today I'm going to have a retrospective review of this particular film and say what works and what does not after all these years. Please subscribe to my channel and help me grow this channel more because this year is going to be great for us. So without any further delays, guys, let's begin. So, in real essence, The Fast and the Furious is a 2001 German-American car action film directed by Rob Cohen, and it starred a very young seminal cast that not a lot of people knew about. Paul Walker, Vin Diesel, Jordana Brewster, Johnny Strong, Chad Lindberg, and Yune in some major and supporting characters as well. The film tells the story of Brian O'Connor, who is an undercover LAPD operative that is tasked on finding about a series of high-stake hijackings that are somehow connected to the street racing world. And turns out there are three gangs that are in the suspicion, unaware that there's a wider plot going around this entire thing. Let's be real. This movie is just a remake, or let's say a rehash of the 1987 film No Man's Land and, of course, the 1991 film Point Break. You can already find the videos related to No Man's Land above. But what makes it cool is that the narrative of those movies is built into something very, very genuinely enjoyable even after all these years. Think about this. No Man's Land and The Fast and the Furious have a very similar looking protagonist. DB Sweeney and Paul Walker are exactly the same kind of characters, and they look very awfully similar. But what works is Paul Walker has a certain kind of charm that DB did not in the 1987 film. But in any case, the movie also goes into the idea of exploring Vin Diesel, who is a criminal but also somebody who's got a code. He's a street racer. He drives around in a beautiful red Mazda RX-7, something that I genuinely want to own someday. And of course, the movie goes into a weird side tangent where we see that there is a hijacking plot involved around these characters. Then there's of course an unconventional ending, which we'll get to about in the next section. Let's exactly talk about the next section of the video, which is somewhat dedicated to the cars of the film, which have somehow managed to be so iconic even after all these years of the film's release. One of the coolest things about this entire movie could obviously be the cars. A movie where the cars are the stars and the actors themselves were not very famous when the film came out is an irony in itself. Dom drives an RX-7, Brian drives a Toyota Supra, Letty drives a Nissan Silvia S14, there is Chad Lindberg's Jesse that is driving a Volkswagen Jetta from 1995 if I'm not mistaken. There is a character that's driving a Nissan Skyline GTR R33 as well. Johnny Tran is driving a Honda S2000. The kind of cars they selected for this movie are absolutely spot on, and who in their right minds would have believed that the Skyline and Supra and also today the RX-7 would be in the six-figure territory. Yes, RX-7s have already started touching six-figure territory in Japan and sometimes in America as well. Crazy, right? I know, right? I know. The entire idea about the cars being so cool has kind of got to do with the technical advisor of the film, Craig Lieberman, who literally operates a YouTube channel and is responsible for narrating the behind the scenes of what happened in the first two Fast and Furious movies, which he was directly working on. There's even a book he's written or something like that, which I want to read and find out about. So that's the entire idea about the cars, the way I'm seeing it. One of the best cars, at least, that I liked in the entire movie would obviously be Dom's RX-7, the red one. Unfortunately, did not have a huge amount of screen time in the film, which is the only demerit in my understanding. But personally, if there's any other car that you would want me to talk about, would be the High Civics. Who in their right minds would have imagined a coupe, a three-door Civic, would actually end up being such a cool, evil-looking car? And yeah, that's the best part about this movie. They managed to make such a normal looking coupe, such a beautiful car that is still fetching for 5 figures in the American market. At least what I've seen in the market so far. So that's all for the cars part. Personally, the High Civic and the RX-7 are my favorite cars, and I'm not going to change that opinion anytime soon. Now, as far as the franchise standards of the movie are concerned, I'll definitely say that this is one of those movies where the action in the film is genuinely very grounded. Remember that last sequence with the truck and Vince? That sequence definitely has to be the most raw and intense sequence in a Fast and Furious movie. Now, don't get me wrong, the other movies also had equally intense, or let's say equally jaw dropping sequences as well. But this particular sequence, no matter how absurd it might look today, because there are places where you see that the stuntman is clearly visible and not the actor, and even some obvious wire work as well. The movie's sequence, the last heist sequence, is definitely iconic, even after all these years of the film's release. Vince being tied to a truck, hanging on his life, the heist miserably failing, Letty being thrown off the road, Dom's car essentially breaking down because the hijacker just shot it down with a shotgun. Irony is that this is what they were teasing in the entire movie as well. There was a point where they were, and now they're actually doing it. Funny enough, the reveal scene in the film, of course, which is a very different angle for this point of segment that I'm making, the reveal scene where we get to see that Brian is actually a cop is jarring, very very shocking. You can literally see the anger on Vin Diesel's face when he gets to know that the very person he was trusting and being around for such a long time, he's actually a cop. And that anger shows up towards the chasing the killer sequence as well, where he literally says the golden words.
I swear to God, you are the cop! You're a cop!
Says the golden words. Exactly what I was talking about. So, the entire idea that the action of the movie is also iconic holds up really well. The car sequences hold up mostly well for all the years right now. And of course, the final heist sequence, which by the way won a Taurus Award for the particular stuntman who was doing it. And they pulled it off very well. Jordana Brewster was driving the car. Michelle Rodriguez was also part of the sequence. I like how they managed to include the women without any kind of woke propaganda, something modern movies rarely do. So yeah, this would be the point for action. Personally, I believe the action of this film is far more grounded than the other installments. And would had they even followed anything remotely like this in the other movies, the franchise would have been something very different today. But yeah, we still have what we have. So that's the point about action, and we now get to the next segment of the video. After all the things that have managed to hold on very well at the film's helm, couple of elements haven't. Just for instance, the lack of a strong villain. Now, don't get me wrong, the Fast and Furious movies have had great villains over the years, but when you look at it in a retrospective lens, Johnny Tran as a character does not hold much stem as opposed to what his other peers in the other movies are holding up. Johnny Tran is pretty much treated as a minor character in the first film. You barely see him in a couple of scenes and you can count them by hand. If I'm not mistaken, the guy doesn't appear anything more than in 5 to 6 scenes at best. And if you exclude the last sequence where the drive-by shootout happens, it was just a stuntman who was resembling Rick Yune that was put onto the bike. It wasn't exactly Rick Yune being Rick Yune or Johnny Tran in that particular sequence. Johnny Tran and Lance, his cousin, they were the most underdeveloped villains in the entire franchise. We could have seen a lot more from these characters and understood what exactly went down between Dom and Tran that they ended up being rivals, because there are dialogues in the movie that hint that something was happening before the events of the movie that led to them being rivals. Maybe they knew something on the lines of the hijackings that were taking place. Maybe they were partners in the hijacking plot. But turns out that something went sour and then again they parted ways. That dialogue is pretty clearly mentioned in a scene that you can already see in the movie. So that's the point about the lack of a strong villain, and I generally believe that whatever screen time Rick Yune and Reggie Lee had received, they played the characters well, but they had more potential to appear more times on screen instead of the number of times that they just managed to appear, because the movie was mostly diverted to being a Paul Walker and Vin Diesel saga. And yeah, that's exactly the issue with these two characters. They could have been more iconic, they could have been more menacing as villains, but unfortunately we never get to see that. So that concludes my point about villains, and the next point is going to be a particularly controversial one. The second problem with the movie could easily be a franchise. A lot of people might not know this, that Vin Diesel never exactly wanted the movie to be a big franchise. The movie was sort of written in a way that it would be self-contained, exactly how Point Break and No Man's Land ended up being. But this movie unfortunately became a bigger franchise. Imagine if it would have only been one Fast and Furious film. The rest of them never existed. It was just one Fast and Furious movie, and you got to know that Dom is somehow chilling out in Baja, Mexico, and he's having fun, and there's nothing we can do about it anymore. ending the franchise at that sort of a point would have been much better. There's another thing that I would like to mention in the next section, which again would be supporting this claim. But that's the thing. Vin Diesel always envisioned the first Fast and Furious movie as a one movie, not exactly a franchise film, a one-timer film. But then again, the movie got converted to a franchise, but we still have good movies in the end. But that's the demerit. They could have made it a one movie and it would have looked far more iconic. Now, as mentioned in the earlier plot or the earlier section of the video, this movie has a lot of deleted scenes. Contrary to popular belief, a lot of the deleted scenes in the movie are actually good. But the issue being the pacing and the structure of the movie, at least in the final cut, the one you see on the DVD, the one you see on TV, the one you see on streaming websites, the movie looks surprisingly coherent. If you try to add the deleted scenes into the plot becomes much more thicker and much more convoluted in a sense. There are scenes where we get to understand Mia's character better. There are scenes where we get to understand Dom's character better. There are scenes where you understand Leon's character better, who's again a massive minor character that has never appeared in any movie other than the first one. We also get to understand Jesse's character a bit. We understand something on the lines of why Bilkins, played by Tom Barry, is essentially the moron that he is, of course, according to the movie, because he's always shouting at Brian and asking him to get results ASAP. So that sort of a thing was never mentioned in the final cut. The deleted scenes is a literal horde of so many things that could have been inside the Fast and Furious movie. And now coming to the infamous part. The Fast and the Furious had an alternate ending. Not the ending where we see Dom chilling out in Baja, Mexico, and the screen cutting to black as Brian tries to leave the crime scene. There's another ending that shows how Brian has left the job force, or he's not a cop anymore, and Tanner manages to drop him at Dom's. He goes to Mia's house, that is the Toretto house itself, and understands what exactly has been the case with Toretto, where he's gone. He tries to restart his relationship with Mia, but then again, that is never going to happen because it's pretty complicated considering the events that transpired before this entire thing took place. That ending could have taken the franchise into a very different direction, and it would have sort of kept the entire movie as a self-contained thing, except they took it to a completely different direction now. Anyway, you can already see parts and bits of the ending being shown on the screen here just for reference, but yeah, that's the entire idea. Entire video up, the way I see it, the action, the cars, parts of the acting, parts of the soundtrack, and of course parts of the movie's screenplay do hold up well. What doesn't hold up well is definitely the stunt work in places, the poor CGI work, of course, an underdeveloped villain character, the deleted scenes that were exactly more powerful than what you would otherwise want to believe, and the idea that this never remained a one movie. It just became a huge franchise. It just became a giant franchise, which should not have been the case. Well, that's all for the video, guys. Do subscribe to my channel, and thank you so much for watching it up until this point. If you're a Fast and Furious fan, comment below and also subscribe to my channel. Keep buying films on physical media. That's the best and the most amazing way to protect movies for long. Stay safe, take care, bye-bye. And I'm going to watch Toy Story 5 this day, and let's see how that movie turns out. We'll get a review tomorrow. So bye-bye.